And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Sandberg fires back. Facebook COO defends herself and her company over accusations that she was asleep at the wheel. But backlash from investors, employees, even users not letting up. And Diane Greene is out as Google Cloud CEO. Why one of the company's few top female execs is being replaced despite calls for more women at the top. Plus, California is under fire as the Butte County Camp Fire becomes the most devastating in the state's history. How Silicon Valley workers are being impacted and the ways tech may be able to play a preventative role. But first to our top story, the continued fallout from the New York Times blockbuster report alleging top-level mismanagement of Facebook. On Friday, COO Sheryl Sandberg took to social media to defend herself against allegations in the piece, writing, quote, on Facebook, to suggest that we weren't interested in knowing the truth or we wanted to hide what we knew or that we tried to prevent investigations is simply untrue. The allegations saying I personally stood in the way are also just plain wrong. This was an investigation of a foreign actor trying to interfere in our election. Nothing could be more important to me or to Facebook. She also called the anti-Semitic tactics a Facebook-hired firm used against George Soros abhorrent. She also said she didn't know Facebook hired this firm, the Definers, but also admitted that she should have known. Bloomberg is reporting depressed morale at Facebook as employees try to grapple with what they read. This as investors call for Zuckerberg to split his role as both CEO and chair, along with renewed calls from lawmakers to investigate the legal ramifications of it all. Here to dissect it all, we have Activate CEO Michael Wolff, and in Connecticut, we've got Kyle Jensen, Associate Dean of the Yale School of Management. Michael, I want to start with you. At a higher level, how do you think these governance issues will play out here? You have the top two leaders now being criticized for both being asleep at the wheel, essentially.
Yeah, from a governance perspective, we have to remember that Facebook is a control company. So Mark Zuckerberg controls all the voting in the company. The board serves at his pleasure. So I'm not sure that they're really going to play out differently. I think the bigger issue is the backlash from users, yes, from shareholders, but even more importantly from advertisers. Right now, those are the people that can really vote with their feet. Users have already shown, going back to some of the original issues with Facebook earlier in the year, that users aren't walking away from the platform. They're not walking away from Facebook. They're not walking away from Instagram or WhatsApp.
That said, we do have a survey, a poll conducted by YouGov that shows Facebook is one of the country's least trusted institutions. Amazon and Google, meantime, fall right behind. The top-ranked military, and Facebook is in the bottom three. So, Kyle, at what point do we see users revolting?
I think it's very challenging for users to revolt, and there's a few reasons for that. First is that there's tremendous positive network externalities to a network like Facebook. So the value of Facebook to me as a user is proportional in some sense to the number of people who are on there, and that's why someone like myself is on Facebook, but I'm not on new social network number 5. This makes it very difficult for incumbents or for new entrants to compete with Facebook, but it also makes it very difficult for existing users to get off the platform. I think second, as a user on Facebook, if I'm in my 20s or 30s, it's possible I've lived my whole life on Facebook. And while I can export my data, I'm not going to get the picture that someone took of me at a party or the conversations that are in private communities. So I think users are, for better or for worse, stuck on Facebook to some extent. And it's my contention that as long as users are there, there's going to be advertisers there too.
That's an interesting point because, what makes Facebook good is also what makes Facebook vulnerable, right? Makes it a platform vulnerable to interference that foreign actors want to exploit. Michael, are advertisers really going to walk away? We have not seen that in the earnings.
We haven't seen it, but now what's happened is the difference is Facebook having something happen on its platform that it wasn't aware of versus Facebook doing some specific things, including opposition research and opposition opinions and getting out other points of view. Advertisers are going to be under pressure. the bigger issue, it's not just the things that the New York Times recorded and reported on. It's also other things that happened that weren't impacted by Russians and foreign actors. It's the voter suppression. It's some hate groups. And so Facebook has a big challenge ahead of it in order to be able to correct all these. And I'm not sure they're able to easily get their handle on it, given the widespread 2 billion people using the platform.
That's an important point. I did get a chance to go into Facebook's election war room, where they were working around the clock to prevent election interference, and they said that the majority of the activity, the malicious activity or the inauthentic activity that they're seeing, is coming from domestic actors, not from foreign actors. I want to talk about leadership because, on a press call yesterday, Mark Zuckerberg defended himself and also defended Sheryl Sandberg. He said, I think Sheryl was also not involved. She learned about this at the same time that I did, talking here about the work with this controversial firm, the Definers. Zuck went on to say, Sheryl is doing great work for the company. She's been a very important partner to me, continues to be, will continue to be. She's leading a lot of the efforts to improve our systems in these areas. And as I have tried to convey, while there are big issues, I think we're making a lot of progress. A lot of that is because of the work that she is doing. Kyle, the board has come out saying, in a very unusual statement to hear from the Facebook board, that yes, they did push Sandberg and Zuckerberg to move faster on this stuff, but that they continue to support their leadership. I mean, do you sense any real change happening in Mark Zuckerberg being the CEO and chair of this company and Sheryl Sandberg being his number two?
Well, for the same reasons articulated earlier, namely Mark's controlling shares in the company, I don't see a change being forced upon them. I do think there's probably going to be substantial change in terms of the way the leadership governs itself and the way they behave, and potentially the way the board interacts with the leadership. So, for example, you can imagine a very astute thing to do might be to convene an investigative panel chaired by one of the respected board members that's able to work independently within the company to investigate how Facebook handled this issue.
So you are suggesting that the board launch an internal investigation of Facebook and how they handled these issues specifically?
So I think this is a very reasonable thing. First, Erskine Bowles obviously comes off looking very good in the New York Times piece as an advocate for further investigation into this issue. And I think even if we take Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg at face value and believe that they are doing their utmost now to rectify this issue, the fact is they've probably lost the faith of users, advertisers, other stakeholders in Facebook. So it's probably good for someone else to be seen who is independent leading on this issue.
Michael, what do you think about the pushback from lawmakers here? We have Senator Amy Klobuchar sending a letter to the DOJ. She tweeted about this following these reports that they'd hired this outside contractor to spread misinformation on critics. Again, this is something that Facebook has pushed back on. They said they never paid for fake news, paid to spread misinformation. But what do you think about the pushback from Congress now?
Well, I mean, certainly somewhere at Facebook, heads are going to roll. I doubt it's going to be anybody in the most senior management. In the same way that Mark Zuckerberg is responsible for the user growth and the product and experience for consumers, Sheryl has been responsible for Facebook becoming a large-scale business. I think that lawmakers, of course, there's going to be hearings about this. This is going to be a very political issue, especially given the overall backlash against tech in Congress. I still don't think that there's no specific legislation. There's nothing that's really going to limit Facebook's ability to grow as a company.
Kyle, one last question for you. We've been reporting on the morale at Facebook, employees in the cafeteria, very quiet, talking in these internal chat rooms, some people saying, I can't believe I've been sitting here and helping these people who've just made so much money off of my efforts, and others saying, look, I admire Sheryl Sandberg because it's hard to run a global company, and it seems like she's been pretty savvy. I mean, I think we forget that this is a company that has to continue to run and keep its employees on side. How do Sandberg and Zuckerberg do that when clearly there are leaks about their efforts, about some of their internal conversations, and keep the troops rallied?
I think that's a very challenging problem, and it's not just a problem for their existing employees. I see Yale students every day, many of whom are recruiting into Facebook, and all of them ask me, should I go to Facebook now? Is it a good time to go here? Do I have a future there? Will this company be around in the most extreme case? Or is it a good company in which to spend my life? And so you can see this is the kind of thing that makes this an existential threat for the company, because they're, of course, in competition for the best and the brightest talent with Google, Apple, Microsoft, and all these other companies. So I think your question really, I wish I knew the answer to your question. I don't. I think it's a very big challenge, not just motivating the current employees, but creating a company culture that attracts the best and the brightest for the future.
All right, Kyle Jensen, Yale School of Management, Michael Wolff, Activate. Always great to have you, Michael,
Great to be here
on the show. The New York Times, interesting to that point, has a piece out today about how new college grads aren't so excited about working at Facebook, and they are looking elsewhere. We're going to have more on the story later in the show. We are going to speak exclusively to an investor whose firm holds an $11 million stake in Facebook, and he wants to see big changes at the top. Meantime, Google Cloud CEO Diane Greene has stepped down and will be replaced by former Oracle executive Thomas Kurian. Greene will remain CEO through January, working with Kurian, who will join the Alphabet unit November 26. Greene said she'll stay on as an Alphabet board member and plans to turn her attention to mentoring and education. Controversial, though, as Google grapples with not having enough female executives. Coming up, 2018 has been quite a year for tech IPOs. Could 2019 be even bigger? We will discuss the most anticipated tech IPOs next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Earlier this week, we questioned whether the love for FANG stocks is fading. According to Bank of America Merrill Lynch, investors have cut allocations to tech stocks to the lowest since February 2009. Michael Scholl, MarketField CEO, also says losses may mount because of concerns about future growth or profitability. What does it all mean for coming tech IPOs? Joining us now to discuss, we've got Gary Kirkham, Bank of America, head of global tech investment banking, and Bloomberg's IPO reporter, Alex Barinka. So, Gary, we're waiting for all of these big IPOs, potentially early next year. Uber, Lyft, Slack, Airbnb. If this market conditions like this continue, will those IPOs happen as planned?
We think they will. We think there's going to be a great market next year for U.S. IPOs and global IPOs. And certainly there's been a little bit of temperament in the market today, but we feel that the underlying growth in the U.S. market, and we feel that given all of the M&A and LBO activity that's occurred over the last year, which has taken a lot of capital out of the markets, we see portfolio managers looking for good, solid, strong tech IPOs in
Alex,
19.
Does that echo what you're hearing?
It does, and it's curious because, and Gary and I have spoken about this, with these big tech companies selling off, sometimes folks are looking for other places to find growth and new companies to find growth. I am curious, though, Gary, you oversee IPOs. You also work on the M&A advisory side. A sell-off, potentially good for potential buyers looking to buy assets as well. Qualtrics was just bought right before it listed this month. Does this kind of sell-off make good moves for potential acquirers? Will the M&A market also come back strong?
It will. It will. So we see a lot of strategic interest right now amongst all of these, these terrific private companies. And there's a huge appetite on the large strategic side to buy growth, to buy technology, to buy innovation. And they've had the benefit of tax reform this year, so there's a lot of cash in their coffers. You combine that with the fact that a little bit of a sell-off reduces the multiples in the space, and that's generally a good thing for M&A.
So is this more of a positive for the IPO market or the M&A market having a little bit of valuation, maybe realism, as some of the skeptics might say?
I think on balance it's a little better for the M&A market, but it still does not do anything of harm, we think, to the IPO market as well.
Do you think that valuations will stand up? You know, bankers are shopping Uber at $120 billion valuation, Slack $10 billion, Airbnb $30+ billion. Do the valuations hold?
We think they hold for selective assets. I mean, I think valuations overall over the next year you could see coming down marginally, but for the select assets, these are very unique companies, and they offer very unique entry points in the markets. Their growth is generally very, very good. And so there's always been a special premium for companies like those.
I'm curious, when you do think about kind of the Silicon Valley groupthink a couple of years back, IPO was a scary perspective. Folks said, there's all this cash in private hands, why don't we just take it? SoftBank is now here with a lot more cash, and yet a lot of these consumer tech companies are saying it's time. How are management teams kind of squaring this idea of taking public capital versus also staying private for longer?
Well, you certainly see a trend over the last 5 years where management teams and boards of technology companies have stayed private much longer. It's been a lot easier for them. There's just an enormous amount of private capital in the world that they can take, and they can take generally at slightly higher valuations to public valuations, and they don't have to go through the exercise of the IPO. So for many, it's been a way to build their companies to ever more mass, to attract talent to the organization, and to really build these behemoths that we're seeing in technology today.
So map out 2019 for us when it comes to IPOs and tech M&A. What do you see?
I see several very good tech IPOs next year. I see another class beneath that are still very good companies, but quite a bit smaller. So I think you'll see on the order of 50 or more good tech IPOs.
That's more than this year.
That's a little more than this year. And then in terms of M&A, I think you'll continue to see large strategics who are looking for growth, who are well capitalized, purchase some of these companies as they move on their route towards the IPO.
All right. Gary Kirkman, Bank of America, Head of Global Tech Investment Banking, and our own Alex Barinka. Thank you both. Lots for you to cover next year, and a lot of hard work for you, Gary. Coming up, air quality in the Bay Area has reached unhealthy levels in the week since the Butte County's Camp Fire set ablaze. How tech could be used in the future to detect and predict similar disasters next. And Bloomberg Tech live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our Global Breaking News Network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. California's Camp Fire in Butte County has now become the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in the state's history. In the week since the blaze began, the number of people missing has swelled to more than 600. More than 60 people have been confirmed dead. Meantime, the air quality in the Bay Area is rivaling Beijing, with ash blanketing San Francisco. President Trump is expected to visit the state this weekend to tour the affected areas and meet with victims, a week after blaming state officials for poor preventative measures. With his criticisms in mind, many computer scientists, researchers, and academics are looking to technology for an answer. We're joined now by Bloomberg's Olivia Zaleski, who's been reporting on how this has been impacting Silicon Valley. And on the phone from Portugal, we've got San Jose State University Associate Professor Craig Clements, who focuses on micrometeorology and the behavior of wildfires. And Craig, you're actually traveling at a global wildfire conference. But first, I want to ask you, as far as you know, when it comes to the Butte County fire and here in the Bay Area, how does this play out? What's next in the next 24 to 48 hours?
Well, the Sierra Nevada, the mountainous regions near the Camp Fire, under a red flag warning, a fire weather watch, and that means that dry, gusty winds are forecasted for the weekend. So that means that more smoke will be transported to the Bay Area, potentially increasing the smoke levels and potentially being a dangerous condition for firefighters on the fire lines.
What has made this fire so difficult to fight, and why is the air just not moving over the Bay Area?
Well, the region has a high-pressure system over it, and so that's what's keeping the air very stagnant. There's not a lot of wind in the Bay Area. But with these northeast winds that are forecast, that could flush out some of the air in the Bay Area, but it's just going to be replaced with the smoke from the current campfire. So the reason why it's a difficult fire is we're in fall and our fuels are very, very dry. And when you have an ignition with very dry fuels and high winds, as the winds were last week when the fire started, that makes it very dangerous and a very fast-spreading fire.
Now, here in San Francisco, you can see the air behind me. I mean, you can normally see the Bay Bridge over my shoulder, and it's almost completely obscured. I've got my mask here for right after we get off the set. Olivia, you've been covering how tech companies are handling this, how it's impacting employees. What are you hearing?
Well, Google, Facebook, Airbnb, Uber, they all have their headquarters here in the Bay Area, some of the biggest technology companies in the world. And many of them are telling their employees to work from home today. They're advising that. Just coming in on the commute is considered dangerous. And then if they are coming into the office, they're giving out masks. Some offices are even doubling up on their air purifiers.
Schools are closed. My kids are out of school. It's impossible to get masks or air purifiers on Amazon delivered, in any short amount of time. Craig, you've been looking into how technology, how potentially AI could help prevent and fight disasters like this. How advanced is that technology, and is it being used right now?
Well, I'm not too sure on how advanced the technology is, but I know that there are teams around the world that are using deep learning and AI to understand how fires behave. But in general, most fire prediction systems are based on combustion models that are linked to fire weather models. And so, we can forecast pretty well what the fire weather conditions are going to be, and we kind of understand how fires spread in these types of conditions, but we don't understand a lot of aspects of how plumes and spotting occur. And so that's what really drives rapid spread rates. And so that's where the state of the science is right now.
So ultimately, right now, is it up to humans and, good old-fashioned cell phones?
Well, that's one way. I mean, there's predictive systems out there, numerical models like weather models that are predicting where smoke goes, where fires can move. But right now, I think the big issue is understanding what the fuel conditions are, like how dry are the fuels going to be, and that's part of what we call the National Fire Danger Rating System, and that gives us a forecast of what the conditions are on the ground, but it doesn't give us the fire behavior in real time. So there's a lot of different models out there that scientists and fire managers use, and that gives us an idea of what to expect next. And I think what they're worried about right now is this next wind event this weekend and how severe it may be. It doesn't look like it's going to be as strong as last week for sure, so that's a good sign.
So here in the Bay Area, should we be bracing for bad air quality through the weekend, through Monday?
Yes, I believe that the Bay Area Air Quality District has a warning out till Tuesday. So all weekend it's going to be smoky. Because if we have those northeast winds blowing into the Bay Area, they're bringing that smoke back into the Bay Area. So no, we're not letting up yet. It's not letting up yet.
All right. Everybody stay safe. Craig Clements, San Jose State's fire expert, and Olivia Zaleski continuing to keep us updated on what's happening in Silicon Valley. And, of course, our hearts go out to everybody who's been affected by these fires. So devastating. Coming up, after the latest Facebook scandal, some investors are calling for management to be shaken up. Our exclusive conversation with someone who's been calling for a new chair at the social network. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Back to our top story, the latest Facebook scandal and what it means for the company going forward. The New York Times revelations have some analysts and investors clamoring for a C-suite shakeup. Stifel analyst Scott Devitt said in a note to clients that under more scrutiny than ever, the campaign trail to rebuild credibility will be long and difficult, adding that Facebook could accelerate the credibility rebuild by considering making change at the top of the organization, and that leadership has been a point of contention for Trillium Asset Management, a firm that holds close to $8 million in Facebook. Back in June, they filed a shareholder proposal to remove Mark Zuckerberg from his role as chair, citing mismanagement of several crises like Russian election meddling and failing to protect users' data. Trillium's SVP and Director of Shareholder Advocacy, Jonas Krohn, joins us now from Washington. Jonas, you were asking for that before this story, and in fact, your shares have fallen from $11 million to now $8 million because of the Facebook stock slide. What do you think now that you've read this report?
Well, thank you very much for having me today. And I think this tells us something that we've been knowing for a long time. And if anything, these new reports should remove any lingering doubts that anybody has that it's time for there to be an independent board chair at Facebook. One of the interesting things in the report was the interactions between the audit committee and the board and Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sanders. It was Sandberg, rather. Sorry. There was also interesting to see yesterday how the board of directors put out a statement indicating their support for Mark and Sheryl. And I think what's really interesting there is it shows us exactly what is going on and why we should be concerned and why the company needs to have an independent board director. The board of directors indicated that they were providing their support, but the chair of the board is Mark Zuckerberg. And so that's essentially the board saying, that's basically Mark Zuckerberg saying that he supports Mark Zuckerberg. And that shows us right there that we really need to start having that independent leadership on the board of directors going forward.
That said, Mark Zuckerberg was asked this question on a press call yesterday. Take a listen to what he had to say.
For the board composition, I don't particularly think that specific proposal is the right way to go, but I am quite focused on finding ways to get more independence into our systems in different ways, which is one of the big proposals that I'm talking about that I discuss in the note is around this independent body for appeals.
So, Jonas, no sign that Mark Zuckerberg wants to change anything, and as we know, he holds the majority of shares, and forcing that change upon him would be very difficult. So, what's your response to him?
Well, I appreciate that he seems to be looking for opportunities to bring that level of independence into the board of directors, or at least into the company in some capacity. And I just respectfully would have to disagree. I think we are seeing clearly that an independent board chair would be good for the company. And I think it's important to point out that while Facebook is an important and critical company, it's also just a company, like so many other companies, that have independent board chairs. So Apple, Google, Oracle, Twitter, Microsoft, so many other companies have separated the chair and CEO. We have about at least a majority, about 2/3 of the S&P 1500 have independent board chairs. It's just basic good governance.
So, I want to talk about the reaction here from lawmakers. Amy Klobuchar writing a letter to the DOJ. We've got other lawmakers calling for regulation. Take a listen.
If they don't step up much more aggressively, yes, I confidently predict that we on the policymaking side will get involved. I don't know what that looks like. In fact, it's a little bit of a dicey trail. It's tough to figure out exactly how to do that. But I know this, if they don't exercise some sense of community responsibility, then there will be efforts, and I, again, predict successful, to impose it upon them.
That's Congressman Denny Heck there, who is on the House Intelligence Committee, and it's clear from this article that Facebook has upset folks on both sides of the aisle. Would you want the government to step in here?
Well, at this point, I think we're looking for opportunities to convey our message with other shareholders directly to the board and to Mark Zuckerberg. And along the lines of where public officials come in here, I think it's important to point out that the shareholder proposal that we filed actually has gotten the support, has received the support of some critical public leaders in the markets. So the treasurers of Illinois, the treasurer of Rhode Island, the treasurer of Pennsylvania, the controller of New York City have all actually co-filed this shareholder proposal and put their weight behind it. So while Trillium holds about $8 million worth of Facebook, this group of investors combined holds about $800 million of Facebook shares. So we're out there as Facebook investors, talking to other investors, talking to the markets to make the case for why it's time to have an independent board chair. And so that kind of public involvement, I think, is really critical.
Some analysts have echoed your call. Take a listen to this from Brian Weiser at Pivotal.
There are massive managerial and cultural problems with the company, and I don't think they fully, they have not acknowledged the scale of the problem at the top of the company, unfortunately. They clearly haven't done a top-to-bottom review of what they are as a company in terms of what they stand for culturally, ethically, morally.
Other analysts have also recommended bringing in another experienced leader from the outside that people know. What do you think of that idea, and who could that be?
Well, I certainly think that there should be some more independent leadership brought onto the board of directors. Who it should be, I guess I hesitate to sort of start playing the parlor game of naming names, but I think we know what kind of person we need to have in the chair role. It needs to be somebody that's really genuinely independent, somebody that has gravitas and can be able to speak with authority and with the confidence of the rest of the members of the board. I think it needs to be somebody that has a broad diversity of experience, clearly tech experience, but I think also there could be some real merit in having somebody from the traditional media, the newspaper industry that has a deep understanding of the role of media in society. Somebody with some time on their hands, because I think by all accounts this is going to be a long few years ahead of the company, and they're going to need to be able to be devoting an enormous amount of time. And somebody that can really sort of understand the operational, the technical, the political, the financial risk that the company is facing.
Since this particular article was published, have you sensed a change among other shareholders and what they're agitating for?
Absolutely. I have been hearing from all different stripes of investors to indicate their support of the shareholder proposal. They see the value in having an independent board chair. 2 years ago, a similar ballot measure was put on the Facebook proxy. At that time, it got about 51% of outside shareholders. Only more and more reasons over the last few years to support that. I expect that when we do go to a vote in May of 2019, I think the support from Wall Street is going to be much higher for this shareholder proposal.
Now, how concerned are you about the business? Say they make some changes, but there's no huge shakeup at the top. We haven't really seen concrete evidence that users are pulling back, that advertisers are pulling back. That hasn't happened yet. Are you worried about that going forward? Or, is Facebook just so big that it's got a monopoly on that?
Well, of course we're concerned, because we think that having an independent board chair is related to financial performance, and that this would be some steps that the company can take to improve their financial outlook. We are long-term investors. We're in for the long haul, and we wouldn't still be in the company if we didn't believe that they had the ability to fix things and to make things right. Putting an independent board chair in the on the board of directors isn't going to solve all the problems, but it's a necessary step. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary.
All right, Jonas Kron, Trillium Asset Management, thank you so much for weighing in.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Coming up, big companies like PayPal, Google, and Amazon are paving their way more and more into fintech. Is it becoming too crowded for London-based unicorn TransferWise to keep up? That's next. Plus, Tim Kendall wants to help you put down your phone so you can get your time back. How his company Moment plans to do it. This is Bloomberg. In 2011, Estonians Taavet Henriques and Kristo Carmen were living in London. Taavet, Skype's first employee, was paid in euros but had bills to pay in pounds. Kristo was paid in pounds but needed euros to pay his mortgage in Estonia. Every month, they struggled to move money internationally. So, in 2012, they founded TransferWise, a peer-to-peer money transfer service bypassing banks to keep costs down. Today, the London-based unicorn has raised about $400 million in funding from notable investors, including Richard Branson, Max Levchin, and Andreessen Horowitz. Now, they're opening their API for third-party businesses. But could the frenzy around Brexit impact that business? Here to discuss, co-founder Taavet Henriques joining us now from New York. So, Taavet, continued upheaval around Brexit, uncertainty. How is that impacting your business?
I think we'd all like to just move on and be done with endless drama around Brexit. I don't think any technology company or anybody living in London is enjoying this right now, and we just all love to have a solution and move on with that.
Right, but the drama is continuing, so how are you dealing with it?
So for TransferWise, we really care about a couple of things. We care about regulation. So we are opening an office somewhere in Europe to get regulated and to be able to serve our European customers. And the other question is about talent. So how do we make sure that our employees in London, half of whom are not British, can stay in London? How do we explain to people who are hiring that London is still a great place to come to? I think, tech companies like TransferWise, we thrive on talent, and UK needs to stay a very attractive place to attract talent.
So then what is your sell to employees at this moment of uncertainty?
So luckily, we're a global business. We have 10 offices around the world. So if somebody wants to join us, we'll find them a place to come if they don't want to come to London. But I think London as a city is still a very great place to be, and I think it will continue to be attractive regardless of Brexit.
Are these political issues impacting transfers for better or for worse? I mean, do you see more or less money being moved around?
So we're a very fast-growing company, so it's really hard to see how these things are impacting us. We're continuing to grow north of 50% on an annual basis, so it's hard to detect the micro effects of these things. We do see some months we see more transfers from the UK. It might be because sterling is going up or down. Other months we see more activity in the US. But overall, if anything, I would say that volatility is helpful for our business.
Now, PayPal has been making more and more moves into this space. I know that your argument is always around fees and that you've got the best offer for customers. But how is PayPal impacting your business?
So to be honest, our business is mostly to help consumers move money from one country to another. We've recently been expanding more to the business side, and we're mostly competing with banks. And if we look at banks and the outdated service they're offering, extremely slow, extremely expensive. Everyone loves the TransferWise experience on your mobile, really low cost, really fast. PayPal, while they're a pretty significant company moving a high volume of payments, they're actually not that competitive. If you look at our price comparison, you'll see that using PayPal will be 5 times, 7 times more expensive than using TransferWise.
And, you really are a global company at this point. I mean, who is your biggest competition then? Is it the traditional banking structure?
Still, when we ask our customers, what did you use before TransferWise, banks come up 9 times out of 10. So we do look at the big banks like Citibank, Wells Fargo, HSBC as being our main competition.
Now, we're looking at a big year ahead for IPOs, dependent on market conditions, but, there's a lot of pent-up demand. You're a company that's raised $400 million. What progress are you making towards becoming a public company?
So we feel that for TransferWise, the best place to be is as an independent company and to continue growing. So we're today in more than 40 countries. We're still looking at how do we keep on growing as fast as we can. And being a public company, frankly, probably wouldn't help us grow any faster. We have a great investor base that's very happy with the performance. And while, eventually we might be a public company, that's not something that we spend a lot of time thinking about.
All right, we'll keep our eye on you. Taavet Henriques, TransferWise, thank you so much for stopping by. Still ahead, he's worked at Facebook and Pinterest, but now Tim Kendall wants you to put down your phone. We'll talk about his new company, Moment, and how it is trying to reduce screen time. This is Bloomberg. Nintendo investors are showing concern the Switch game console may have disappointing holiday sales. This after the lackluster debut of a new Pokemon game, analyst downgrades, and a supplier warning of weak demand. The Switch became one of the fastest-selling consoles in history after its release last year, quintupling the company's annual operating profit. Shares of the gaming company dropped 9.1% Friday, the biggest decline in more than 2 years. Well, Tim Kendall worked at Facebook for almost 5 years before becoming president at Pinterest. After working for social networks that have changed the way we use our screens and, most importantly, our time, he has pivoted to try and help people disconnect from their phones and believes tech addiction is a health epidemic. Cue Moment, a coaching app that aims to reduce phone usage. Kendall has bought, funded, and taken over as CEO in an attempt to give people back their time. I sat down with Kendall and asked about tech addiction and how Moment will combat that. Take a listen.
In a phrase, we want to give you back your time. And so the question is, well, how do we do that? And we basically help you understand how you use it. That's sort of like the first step is awareness. And then we give you a whole series of daily exercises and tips and tools that actually help you reduce it and bring it into a realm that you sort of deem as like healthy usage. And what we find when we talk to our users who are able to help reduce their usage on average about 30%, which is significant when you spend 4 hours a day on your phone, people actually notice that even with 30% reduction, their relationships are better, their focus is better, and they're actually just generally happier.
So do you think what Apple is doing here is not enough?
I think it's incomplete. I think, to use a diet analogy, they've basically given people a scale, right? They've given you a sense for how much you use your phone, but then they've stopped. There's no nutritional guidance, there's no exercise regimen, and that's where we think Moment really comes in for people, is that we give people guidance on how to actually understand why they're using their phone as much as they are, and then exercises to reduce it.
Now, you worked at Facebook early for many years. You helped grow Facebook. You worked at Pinterest for many years. I mean, you built products that are part of the problem.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I feel guilty on the margin. Actually, I wouldn't say the margin. I feel guilty. And it's led to this real conviction around trying to help people who want to reduce their usage.
What do you feel guilty about?
Well, I think that, candidly, we didn't even anticipate when I was at Facebook that this would become a health epidemic. That just never even crossed any of our minds. And I think that in retrospect, I wish that I had that realization. And, I obviously can't change the past. What I can change is what I'm doing now, and that's pursuing this conviction to help people who are struggling, like I struggle.
So I got to ask you about this latest Facebook New York Times report that they were slow to act when it came to Russia, that they employed questionable tactics to protect their image. Is Facebook now the one that's threatening our democracy and not people using Facebook in nefarious ways?
Yeah, I think Facebook is finding itself in just such a complex intersection of the world, right? Of government, geopolitical issues, et cetera. And I, having known those folks, I think they're doing the best that they can.
You do?
I do, and I think that there's the pendulum swings right back and forth for all these companies, and I think, unfortunately, they're stuck in a moment right now where it's just they're kind of down, and people are kicking them sort of relentlessly.
But do you think that they are under some sort of misconception about the good that they're doing in the world when we also see so many bad?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, candidly, I think that media today in this current phase is really emphasizing the negative and has kind of forgotten about the good that happens every day. And so I guess my view is I think they're pretty balanced. I think they're pretty conscientious about some of the risk factors and some of the damage that the platform has done, and I think they feel a real responsibility.
And yet you're starting a product that you hope will take time away from, some of these tech companies. Say what the idea that you have works. How do you imagine behavior online changing in 5 years?
Well, I think that what I imagine is that people will just use technology and use their phones in more deliberate ways. We've got, actually to date, we've got 7 million people who've used Moment, and many of them have been able to reduce time spent, and as a result, they feel better, they're happier. And so what I imagine is that I think that people will learn, what I hope is that people will learn that if they can moderate their phone usage and get it into a healthy realm, as they define it, they'll feel better.
How can you make money on this?
So we actually charge for we have a premium product that gives you sort of extra tips and guidance and tools to help you reduce your usage faster.
What about expanding to kids?
So we have a family feature already. So we have that sort of on the margin, I would say, and expect that to get even better. Although my view is, I will say, having worked on this issue for the last year, I think adults are generally in denial about how bad their usage is. When we look at our 7 million Moment users, the 40-somethings are using it, have just as big of a problem as the 20-somethings and as the teenagers. So this notion, I think, and I'm a parent, you're a parent, that, oh, well, really, it's a kid's problem, it's not our problem. And our view is actually the adult modeling is not great right now and is a huge lever in changing how kids use their phones.
Moment CEO Tim Kendall there. Now, we continue to monitor the raging wildfires in northern and southern California. The count of the missing in the Butte County fire north of San Francisco has now risen to more than 600, with more than 60 confirmed dead. It is the most destructive and deadly fire in California history. Meantime, a cloud of ash has blanketed the Bay Area, creating air quality levels worse than anywhere in the world. Schools and companies are closed across the region as firefighters continue to fight this blaze. Our hearts go out to everyone who's been affected by this. Stay safe and keep your families close this weekend. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We are, of course, live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter as well. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.